I got the questions and chat screens up.
Cool. And when the poll comes, I'll just run the poll for you guys.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we are ready to go. So I will kick us off here and give you a quick intro. Here we go. Hello to everybody and welcome to this week's edition of KETIV Virtual Academy. I'm your host, Tyler Hart, and today we will be discussing what's new in Autodesk Vault 2024. Your experts for the day are Phil, Jason, and Jose from KETIV's data management team. They'll introduce themselves in a minute here. But before that, just a couple housekeeping items. As usual, please feel free to send all of your questions to the Q&A tab, and we will do our best to get those answered either during the session or at the end. And also, all of these sessions are recorded and available for distribution on ketiv.com or on our YouTube channel. So without further ado, I'll pass things over to Phil and his team to get us started. Thanks, Phil.
Hey, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I'm Phil Steiger, and I oversee the data management team here at KETIV. Today, I have Jose Perez Clara with me and Jason Cordemanch, and we're going to be going over what's new in 2024. I know that we did this about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, but we wanted to come back and revisit it and actually show a live demo of some of the tools that we're going to be using that are in 2024. So introductions, we have a poll question, and then we're going to do some live demos today so you can see how it actually works. Jason, I'll let you take it from here. Or
Sure.
Yeah, you can take it from here.
Well, you already did the introductions. That's right. We'll go to the poll. So we're just curious what version of Vault people are on and where they're at. Get a sense of our audience who's already on 2024, yeah, or how far behind.
Maybe it's an incentive to come up to 2024.
Or maybe you're on SolidWorks and you need to move to Vault, and 2024 makes it a nice move.
Right?
Yeah.
So just give a few more minutes and then we'll see the results once everyone has had a chance to fill it out. Okay, we have an interesting lineup, 7% on 2024, not surprising given it's only been a few months. The bulk of people are in 2022. And a few no Vault or a little bit of other versions. So we have a great mix. So that's great.
Great chunk within jumping distance. So
Exactly.
like 22, that's it's an easy, simple one jump upgrade to 24. So, if you guys see what you like, then, you're almost there to go for it.
Jose, that's such a great point. Since you can only move the Vault server 2 versions at a time, it's good to stay and get on a certain cadence. It makes upgrades a lot easier than trying to do 2 or 3 version jumps later.
Yes.
So the 3 things we're going to go over, we're going to talk about the copy folder feature, which I know was super excited to see this as a feature. A lot of you have been asking about it for a long time. And so it's great that it's finally here. I'm looking forward to it. And especially, as someone that delivers a lot of Vault, setting them up, this is probably one of the most often requested features, especially if you think about from an organizational standpoint, not wanting or needing to train users on, how to make folders and subfolders and getting the text just right, getting the organization just right, especially when you have a certain organizational subfolders per product or per customer. And so this is going to save us a lot of time and just keep consistency, because as most of you know, in any Vault or PDM system, it's about, reuse and being able to find the data. And part of that is making sure that we keep things in the right location.
Yeah. Before this function, there was just a slew of ways that we tried to get this to work. I know a couple of customers that we should definitely just come to mind. We're like, hey, this feature is now available. I know they're not on 2024 yet, so definitely something we have to talk to them about and be like, hey, that feature that you requested when we were deploying this, it's available now. So
Yeah, it's great. So we'll demo this. The other one that we really want to get to is a peer review, basically giving us a way to prevent one user from, checking the file in and then just releasing the document. So the peer review really gives us an opportunity to make sure that the last person to check the file in can't be the same person that actually gets to release the drawing, and so that we get that double check, which is, a nice kind of half step for customers that want another person to view it, but are not ready or don't need the full integration of a change order. And so it's a nice mid ground to add value, but not add a bunch of extra clicks, which is kind of cool.
and it kind of adds to the rigidity of the ECO process in a way, because now you can have multiple peer reviews throughout your lifecycle states, and life cycles are pretty open, and you can configure them as you like. So that adds the rigidity there, or it takes away from the ECOs.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's, that's one of the main benefits of Vault, is making sure that we have accurate drawings getting released with the correct rev numbers, the PDFs are, match. And so this is just a way for accuracy, because last thing we want is the wrong release drawing down on the shop floor and they're making something, the bolt's in the wrong location and you got to scrap a bunch of units. It's little features like this that make a huge impact. And it doesn't seem like that big of a deal until you've worked somewhere where they've lost hundreds, if not millions of dollars because they've manufactured something the wrong way. And that's when it really makes sense why these extra little checks make all the difference. And then we're going to also talk about the new feature. As most of you know, we've always been able to vault design data and templates into Vault, but this feature allows it so that when we open up Inventor, Inventor checks Vault to make sure that we have the latest version of all the design data and the start parts for the templates. So we'll be talking about that. So with further ado, let's get into Vault. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. So if we think about the folders, one way can be is making like a temp folder and then pre-making some sort of folder structure that you want as a template. And then once we create, and the nice thing about this is we can edit the templates as we need, this folder structure. We can get it the way that we want. And then that way we have a structure that we can start with. And then this new little icon right here, copy folders. And we have a bunch of different options. So we can kind of control what do we want the name to be. So project KETIV. We can decide where do we want to copy it to. So in this case, we want it to go into our projects folder. And then we can choose, do we want to include all the subfolders? In this case, we absolutely want subfolders. If we have custom permissions, which is super handy, if we have different groups that can, maybe an office person can only add files to customer data, but engineering can see both folders, then we might need to bring over permissions. And again, if we have any custom properties on a folder, that's something that's, I think, a feature that's forgotten about sometimes, is that you can add properties to a folder. Probably the 3 properties on folder that I see the most would be either like a customer name and like a start date, and then maybe a project status. Is it, and then that way with the drop down list, you could be, project could be open, work in progress and review, closed, submitted. And so it's another way to kind of give you some metadata about where that project is. And then when it's done, especially if you're doing one-off designs per customer or per project, folder permissions can be really helpful. But once we get these the way we want, we just click copy and it's complete. We can click done, and we can see it duplicates the folder structure and brings over and creates all the subfolders that we need. And then this way, now we have a place to be able to check in customer data. So non-CAD data, we can just drag and drop into Vault. For CAD data, we need to use the appropriate CAD tool. And one of the easy ways to do that is if we right mouse click and do go to working folder, this will actually create the folder in our working folder, because we need a landing place. And so now we could move, CAD files into this particular folder. That way on check-in, it automatically goes to the correct folder. And then we're not trying to move it later. If we do accidentally check it into a different folder, that is one of the nice things about Vault, is that you can easily move it into the correct folder, and Vault will maintain all the references to their next ref or parts or drawings and things like that. So we could be even more granular. I've seen some customers do folder for parts, assemblies, drawings. I think that's a little excessive unless it's a super large assembly, but even then, we're big here on it needs to make sense. Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it, and being consistent.
Yeah, and what you showed there was one of the ways that we used to try to do it, was create that folder structure either locally, save a part to it, and then have it, create it inside a Vault. Something like that was the way that we used to try to use a template to create folder structure. But it's nice when, it creates a structure within Vault, it's going to go to the right place. And that way you just create the local working space folders after that to place your files into.
Yeah, this is a great point. Yeah, because before I would see people use like autoloader and put like a dummy file in every subfolder. And so this is, 3 clicks and you're done. This is far easier, which is great. So I expect to see, well-organized folder structures in Vault. There's no excuse anymore. So if we go back to thinking about like peer review, and so that feature has been added to the life cycle feature. So if we come in here, let's go to the behaviors and life cycles. And so the peer review can be added, be configured depending on the life cycle definition, but also on the state. So in this case, if we want to turn this on from going from work in progress to release, go to transitions, we find the transition we want to enable it on, and then we click at it. As we see, there's this new feature in this list for anyone that's not that familiar with this page. So the first criteria has to do with property compliance. We'll come back to that in a minute because I think this will be important. And then, this controls different actions we want to happen during the transition. The custom jobs, that's for if you make a custom job processor thing, there'll be a whole nother topic on that. And then the security really has to do about what users can have access, because every state transition we can decide who can make this transition. So some customers don't want anyone to go straight from work in progress to release. Maybe we want everyone to go to review first, or maybe either power users or only admin. So this is where we would configure that. But anyway, we'll get back to the peer review. So the thing we have to do is that we need to figure out a criteria. And so we need a criteria. In this case, we'll call it DWG files. And so we have to make a rule. And so in this case, we can apply the rule to all files. In this case, we're going to just apply it to AutoCAD files. So we can do it by file extension if we know what it is. So if we want more than one file extension, remember, we can always do or and then do another file extension. I find, for instance, like if we wanted inventor files, it'd be kind of taxing to add all of the inventor file extensions. We can always use the system property provider contains, and then over here we can just do inventor or AutoCAD. And then, because if we look over here at the provider, and so however it shows up here, I don't think it's case sensitive, but just in case. And then we can add it. Again, we can add more than one property, but anytime we have a search field like this, it's always an and. So if I were to well, we'll come back to that. And so this is the bare minimum we need in terms of getting the feature to work. We need a file extension or a way to basically let the software know which files are going to be evaluated through the peer review. And so it knows in the background that the last user to check it in cannot do the transition. So I'm logged in as administrator. We can see the administrator was the last user to check the file in. So at this point, when I do change state from work in progress to release, since that's the only lifecycle transition that has this feature enabled, and it worked. So what I suspect happened is that I made a mistake in the properties. Let's go look at them. To do flex. Let's go here. From work in progress to review. Fine. Contains AutoCAD. Oh, let's be more specific. And so in this case, as an administrator, if we ever make a mistake when we're doing a change state, the way that we redo it, and we can see we're at version 11, there's a feature, if you have the ability to delete files in Vault, you can use this rollback lifecycle change, which will delete version 11 and bring me back to 10. And we'll refresh and let's try this again.
Yeah, that's a neat trick there. Rolling it back. It gets a little bit more complicated with assemblies and parts. You know, because it wants, if you're trying to roll back an assembly, it wants the parts to be at the same state or same version that it was when it was originally moved forward. But it's definitely a neat trick, and we definitely try to use it when things get pushed by accident. As far as is the life cycle the same one? I know we're working on flexible. It is flexible release process. Work in progress to release.
Rule.
They added it. Try adding it in for review and seeing if it's just a
okay. Property file contains TWG.
no, it's letting you.
What am I missing?
AutoCAD provider. Oh wait, that's fine. Your previous one is created by not administrator, it looks like.
Oh, I went back too far for when I was testing. That would do it.
So it's working as intended. The one. Yeah, I'm reading that correctly, right?
Yeah, there we go. Let's get rid of that one. There we go. So this should let me go from release to work in progress because we don't have anything on that state change. And now there it is. Yeah. And so whatever your rule name, it'll show up in here, DWG files enforce policy, that the current user can't be the same as the transition. And so if we come back here and we look at this particular list, flexible, edit, transition. And again, for something like this, you're going to want to test it because we have to set the setting up for every state transition. And so I find it's usually far easier to make a diagram so you know which one of these settings needs your attention and which criteria. So if I were to come in here and I want it to also be, let's say, description can't be null, it's not empty. And I click add. So this has to be an and. So that means all AutoCAD files have to be a DW extension and the description field has to be filled out. So if I were to use this, which makes sense because we don't want things that are filled out, but this is basically a search criteria, not an enforcement. And so if we go down here and I look at the actual file, we can tell that this particular file, the description is filled out. So in this case, it would work, but because it's a work in progress, if this particular file has no description, it'll let it pass because it won't meet the criteria for this should let it pass because it doesn't meet the criteria, because this particular field in the peer review is not designed to block. It's designed to basically use it as a filter. And so that's something to be mindful of, is that, so work in progress to release, that this particular peer review, these criteria are meant as a filter of when this feature gets enabled. And so if we want every file that's being released to have a description field filled out, this isn't where we would put this. We'd remove it from there. This is where we could either hard code it in here that the description needs to be not filled out. And so that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is make it a required field, because if it's a required field in Vault, then the compliance has to be met, because you can't, part of the compliance is you can't have a required field blank when you make the state transition. But that, by making the description field mandatory, that's for all files in Vault. And so if we only want, files on this specific life cycle, that's where we could come in here and do description, is not empty, and add that. And now any file going through this state change has to have the description filled out. And so that's something to be mindful of, is that the criteria here is just to figure out which files in Vault get evaluated by the peer review feature, versus this criteria basically is what stops us, is the validation to make sure that properties are filled out prior to being able to do the state transition. I'm going to remove this so that we can actually get it to move. But that's just something to be aware of. It's like anytime you're making changes to these, it's good to just take a test assembly or a test file through the life cycles a few times, just to make sure that all the settings for all the state transitions are set up the way that you want, because it's very easy to skip one setting. And then the last feature we were going to talk about is the vaulting our design data in Inventor. And so we basically would make a library folder to be able to add the design data and the templates. You can just drag and drop it into Vault if you're an admin, and you temporarily turn off enforce unique file names and enforce restrictions. And then once you load the design data and the template, I encourage you to turn these back on. And so that's by far the fastest way to get these two things in here. And once the data is in here, then we would go to Inventor. We would edit our project file, and then we would basically point the project file. So instead of using the out-of-the-box location for templates and design data, that we point it to local folder. And so when we're creating a new one, we make sure that we're pointed to the correct folder. And then these are basically the subfolders. And so this particular folder matches the location in Vault. And so that's basically how all versions of Vault that you can set up to basically vault your templates and design data. What's new, specifically for Vault 2024, is that you can now, under you know, when you map folders. So every time you create a new Vault Inventor project file, you have to map the folders. Again, if I wanted to make changes, you have to make sure that the project file is checked out. In this case, I'm not going to right this second, but so what's new in 2024 is that we can now map these two, the templates and design data, to the file in Vault. And it's this feature, once they're mapped, that makes it so that every time an end user opens up Inventor, Vault will check to make sure that your local file matches all the files in Vault and that they're all up to date. It says that it's downloading, it's not. It's essentially checking all the files, and it can take a little bit. And that's because if we go back to Vault and we just do a quick search, you know, the design data and template files, there's like 1,400 files. So when you turn this on, it's essentially in the background, Inventor's checking almost a little over 1,400 files to make sure that the version you have in your working folder matches and is the exact version in Vault. And so that's something to be mindful of. And so if I wanted to make these changes, I need to check the file out, the Vault Inventor project file. The easiest way and one of the fastest ways to check it out is just open up a blank part file. Make sure that you're logged into Vault. And then if we come over here, we can add the Inventor tab, and we can see, we can just right mouse click and do checkout. Click OK. Now that it's checked out, I can close this part because I don't need to put it in. And now when I come over here, I should be able to edit the file, edit the mapping, and now I can map the templates to the template folder. I can map the design data to the design data subfolder. Click OK, and then I can just, it's going to, and that's the check that it is to make sure that all the files in my workspace. And so it says downloading, it's not actually downloading. What it's doing, it's just checking to make sure that the files in my workspace match. And if I'm missing a file, then it will download the Delta, but it's not re-downloading all those files. And then now that it's set up right, now I can just create another project or part file, and I can check my file back, my project file back into Vault. This way, all the end users can make sure that they're using the latest version. So because for it to work, we really need everyone that's using Vault to use the same Vault Inventor project file. And that just helps making sure that there's no issues with reference data or missing, things like that. And as a CAD admin, what the admins usually do is you can enforce that everyone uses that project file. And this way, when you do copy design in Vault, it uses this project file, and that's what makes sure that everything's works without any specific broken links. And so that's really in a nutshell. So you can create different folders. You can use the folder copy to be able to create the intergit folders and subfolders needed per project, per customer. Which can include properties and permissions depending on what you need. So it's really worth spending some time to really tweak those so that all new projects have what you want. For the state transition for the peer-to-peer, yeah, we have to make sure that we set it up for every transition that we want it. So going from work in progress to review, or if we only want it when it goes from review to release, or work in progress to release. And then the most important thing is to really take your time to make sure that all the permissions in terms of the so make sure that we're getting the right transitions settings and that we're getting the right criteria. And again, you know, the provider one would work. The question is, like, when you're doing your testing, make sure to look at the history of the file to make sure that when you're testing with a file that you've checked in and you're the user that's trying to make the state change, so that you can make sure that everything's set up the way that it needs to be. And a reminder that, you know, everything down here is an and so we don't really need this particular feature there. if we really want to make sure that all release files have a certain property filled out, we can either make it required, but that's for all files in Vault, or we can just add it to the criteria. But again, we have to do that for each life cycle on each life cycle definition on each life cycle state. And the easiest way is to kind of make a map, because as you can see from this interface, it'd be very easy to, skip or forget to configure one of these. And so I'm a big fan of testing, because if not, it's very easy to skip one setting and then find it, a month later.
Yeah, definitely. Specifically, if you have like multiple administrators, having a starting point and a blueprint that that you built it off of in the beginning helps you troubleshoot if somebody else has made changes to it, and B, you can always get it back to that original blueprint and compare it when you're testing, like you mentioned, Jason.
Definitely. That's a good point. Yeah, so essentially the peer review stops one user from editing a file, check the file in, and then immediately releasing the file. And so the peer review essentially turns that into a two-person process.
It's a demoer's worst nightmare there, because now we have to, if we have it on, we have to sign back to the user and then push it through. I'm sure down the line we're gonna forget we have it on and then try to push something and just like, oh, okay, I forgot that feature is turned on. Let me either explain what it is now or kind of turn it off and go from there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially for users that are power users or an admin that's doing one thing.
In a way, it helps us stay accountable.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there's environments where, people just push things through to push them through. And maybe, they know they shouldn't, but they still do it. And this will kind of help people not do that anymore, and include the necessary avenues or reviewers at that point.
Definitely. So if we move to, do we have any questions?
We had one question, but I think you really answered it. What is peer review supposed to do? Block the transition, basically.
Exactly. That's exactly when we saw from that error message that we get, is that it prevents me from making changes to the file, and then it's peer review gets me this warning message, which lets me know that the same person can't perform file state transition. And this dialog is very similar. The same thing would happen if we turned on the criteria that the description field can't be blank. Then we just get a second error that says description can't be blank on this state transition, as a way for making people fill out the necessary metadata.
Yeah, properties don't match the required values or compliance and things like that. That famous little red tag that's next to the category glyph.
Yeah, so if you make a property required, or if a system property is linked to a metadata in the file and they don't equal the same, then that's when we get the non-compliant flag, which is just an indication that there's something wrong with the metadata usually, and that it needs to be resolved prior to being able to release. And the place where this probably comes in the most handy is when you map the system metadata revision to the title block revision. And so if the file has the wrong revision number, this feature and the compliance will prevent you from making the state transition, which is really helpful, so that you don't have the wrong information on a release document. And so this peer review is just another step in that process, that one person can't edit the file and then do the state transition without getting someone else to review it.
I think this was really helpful. I think some of these tools are great. moving forward in 2024?
Oh, just the folder structure one alone.
Yeah.
Because I've seen some very complicated folder structures that made sense for that customer, but it's like getting them to fill out, 3 folders and then 2 subfolders and 2 of the main folders. It's like that's a lot for an engineer to do, and they could be modeling or doing something else. And so having what was I?
Then you fat finger it, and now that there's a typo in there somewhere, and
Exactly. So easy to do. As you guys probably noticed, we skipped over a couple of the other features of 2024. We'll probably talk about those another time since they're more related to the job processor that deserves its own spotlight.
yeah, some of them
Awesome.
on our admin side and stuff. So
Great. Well, thank you so much to the whole team, Jason, Phil, Jose, for talking us through all of this. As usual, you can reach out to us at support@ketiv.com or just reach out through our contact form. Always happy to put you in touch with an expert when needed. Looks like we've gotten most of the Q&As answered here. Let me just check YouTube. We're good to go on YouTube as well. So if that's what we have for the day, please feel free to reach out, watch these on KETIV.com, share them with colleagues, and join us again next week for next Thursday's session. Thanks so much.